Well, college football seems to always perform. In a lot of games where you saw the results go a certain way that you kind of expect the results go, it didn't come without some drama. For everybody new around here, my name is Colin Bashingle, the host here at Bash's CFB Show, and you can follow me over on TikTok if you want regular daily content. We're going to try to keep pushing videos out. I'm going to make a reaction to the AP poll and post a shortened version of my top 25 to get people's thoughts out there on TikTok this evening. That's what we're going to be doing, and certainly any other stories that catches my eye. So make sure you guys check it out over there. We have a new top 25. I haven't done this in a couple of weeks. I've made them from a week-to-week basis, but never actually made a video on it. We're going to release them as we are a week away from the College Football Playoff Committee coming up with them. So we're going to talk a little bit about the playoff picture, but first we're going to get through the takeaways from the week. So if you like the video, make sure you like the video. Would really appreciate it if you guys did that. Let's get on a roll here. Takeaways from this week in college football. The first thing I have to say is the ACC is a little bit cloudier than what people think it is. Georgia Tech, to me, is definitely in the ACC championship. I just don't see them losing in ACC play with the remaining schedule that they have. You look through what Georgia Tech's accomplished thus far compared to the challenges ahead. They should be able to take care of business. They're going to be favored in all three of the remaining ACC games, and I think that they're going to do so. So they're going to be 11-0 going into that Georgia game, and how that could affect the playoff picture. I made a video on TikTok about it. That would be a pretty big win for Georgia Tech to finish the season 12-0, and it could potentially knock out a Georgia team that a lot of people seem to have locked into the playoff, mainly because all of their challenges are behind them. But we saw with a team like Alabama what can happen when all the challenges, the biggest challenges and tests, are behind you. LSU is no longer ranked. Auburn is not ranked. Oklahoma is barely hanging on to dear life to a ranking. So at this point in time, you have Alabama moved past their biggest challenges, and yet they struggled and got very fortunate to come out with a victory on the road at South Carolina. That South Carolina team came in with a really good game plan. They shortened the game a good bit, especially establishing that with the first drive of the game. And at the end of the day, if it wasn't for a very fortunate play to happen where the ball got punched out by Deontay Lawson, heck of a heads-up play, and a defender just laying on top of it, didn't even know he was on top of the ball. If that sequence doesn't happen, we could have been talking about a major top 5 upset by South Carolina. So hats off to Alabama for surviving that. Down by 8 late in the fourth quarter, drive down, score the touchdown, get the 2-point conversion, tie it up, put South Carolina in that position. Hats off to the Crimson Tide. The other teams that I want to get a hats off to, Texas really rallying and having to do it on the back of their offense. Now, I don't know what the status of Arch Manning is going to be going forward, but Texas really showed a lot of life against a Mississippi State defense that is improved from a year ago, but it's still not great. And they needed every little bit of that offensive explosion in the fourth quarter to come back and win. But Texas is still hanging out there, thinking about what could come for the Longhorns. Remember, they only got one conference loss, and that is to Florida, with everything ahead of them. They have Georgia. They have Texas A&M. They've already beaten Oklahoma. You got to watch out for this Longhorn team down the stretch, because that is probably one of the worst defensive games you're going to see from the Longhorns this year. Allowing 38 points and the first three quarter, really the second quarter dominance that Blake Shapen and that offense was able to go on. Jeff Lebby, really good coach. Very impressed with Mississippi State. It's a shame that they have to continue on with this continuous streak of consecutive SEC losses. I'm sure it'll get broken by some point. That's a team I don't want to face if I'm a defensive coordinator. But when you're talking about Texas, every single great defense has one of those types of games where they just do not have an answer. Texas was able to survive that type of game. You can expect for this defense to step up against the likes of Georgia and Texas A&M. And if this offense can continue to elevate, getting out of Dodge with a win in Stark Vegas might vault Texas with a lot of momentum going forward. And I really think that Texas, having not been a complete product yet this year, could be moving closer to that because they had to go out and win with some offensive explosion and that big punt return, by the way, by Ryan Niblett. Great return by him. How about this, though? Indiana genuinely drew up consideration for my number one spot. A little bit of a spoiler to the top 25. They are just so dominant and so good when you get them in these spots. Kurt Cignetti is able to motivate and get his team up to where they don't sleepwalk. Now they're going to be taking a trip to College Park, Maryland, where, Maryland's not a bad team whatsoever. They've struggled in Big Ten play, which is kind of the norm with Mike Locksley. But keep in mind, these Maryland teams, back-to-back years, I believe it was, they were able to, in November, take Ohio State and Michigan right down to the wire. It was actually, I believe, the year before, so 2022, I think it was, when Maryland took Michigan to the wire at home and took Ohio State right down to the wire at home in 2021 as well. I might have that mistaken. It might be 2022 and 2023 that I'm actually thinking about. That sounds more right. I'm just going to leave it at that. Anyway, moving on. As like I said, Indiana looked very impressive. How about Texas A&M taking care of business? That LSU defense has been exposed the last 2 weeks now as a defense with a lot of talent flying around, but definitely has flaws, has holes, and they certainly were able to exploit that. I think the explosive playmaking ability that Texas A&M has, and I think the all-business approach that Mike Elko has, we're going to touch on them a little bit more in a second, because I have a lot of thoughts on Texas A&M after this week and the amount of buzz in the conversation going around Texas A&M now. It's finally, they're not a sleeper team. They're one to watch for. But I think the most impressive victory that nobody is talking about was BYU. On the road, fall down early by double digits, end up just absolutely gutting one out. Bear Bachmeier has a great second half. That defense forces 4 turnovers, winning the turnover margin 4-0 against a well-coached, fired up Matt Campbell team at Iowa State. Now, Iowa State, granted, not as good as we thought. I really think that was a huge win because BYU continues to find a way. You think they're going to lose to Arizona. Nope, they pull it out in double overtime. You think that they could possibly lose against Iowa State this week. No, they go on the road and take care of business. You think the Holy War, Utah, is going to be the better team. No, BYU showed for 4 quarters that they were the better team. This BYU team is a legitimate playoff contender, and they are opening the door. The combination of them, Texas Tech, Cincinnati, these teams are elevating the Big 12 into a possible 2-bid league, 2 bids in the college football playoff. I think that's definitely possible. I think that was the win of the day. Shout out to Vanderbilt. It did not look pretty. Ended up going against a freshman backup at the end of the game, and the Hail Mary caught at the 1-yard line having to be reviewed. That was a great game, but Vanderbilt, to me, I don't see them making the college football playoff. If they do it, it's because of a beneficiary of a little bit of an easier November schedule, but it's not easy by any means for Vanderbilt to have to beat teams like Texas and Missouri, or Texas and Tennessee, down the stretch of the season. I just talked about Texas, how I think that's going to be a real challenge for Vanderbilt coming up. So now we're going to take a look at my top 25 here. We're just going to get it set up the way I like it here. This is the week 10, I believe it's week 10, top 25 that we have. I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit, but every team will get a little bit of a touch. I think the biggest note to take from this top 25 that you see on your screen right now is my highest ranked group of 5 team is Navy. Huge game this week against the North Texas Mean Green. North Texas really well has done really well bouncing back from that embarrassing second half against South Florida. And now they're 7-1, and they're going to be welcoming in Navy, I believe it is. I think it's at North Texas. I would have to double check that. If Navy could get through that, they're going to have an undefeated, what should be a top 25 matchup between them and Notre Dame. Navy's not going to blow out everybody and be super impressive. And I think that you have to, with these armed force teams, these Navy, Army, Air Force, if they pop up and they have a great season, you can't necessarily look at margin of victory and game control and dominance as a metric for them. You got to kind of weigh in who those teams are. At the end of the day, Navy has not been put in many situations where they had to throw the ball to win. I get they struggled against Air Force. That's a different level of game. We don't punish Ohio State losing to Michigan any different than we probably should for the Commander-in-Chief game. So I think that this Navy team is currently the best team in the group of five. I think they're the toughest to beat because of the style of offense and how well they run it, and they've only gotten better as the season's gone along. But I really also love James Madison. Everybody's talking about Memphis and maybe a little bit of talk about Tulane out of the American. There's James Madison just sitting back there, doing their thing, being dominant on offense the way that they pulled away in the second half against Old Dominion 2 weeks ago. Very, very impressed with what the Dukes have, and they play on Tuesday night against Texas State, and I'm excited to lay eyes on the Dukes. We also got Michigan, Oklahoma, USC right there, 22, 23, 25. Here's the thing. If you have USC ranked below Michigan, I don't know what you're doing. We saw that game, and USC dominated that game. You can't really overreact, especially because they were pretty competitive and had their opportunities on the road at Notre Dame. I don't think this USC team is bad, and we got to just factor that in, the head-to-head that we saw with it being so one-sided. And the same with Oklahoma, but I think you have more of an argument to move Michigan above Oklahoma because Oklahoma does not look like the same football team as they did early on when John Mateer first came back from injury. I think that has more so to do with the competition level that they've played and people just figuring out Oklahoma. I think John Mateer is mostly back to healthy. I just don't think he's all that good. And that's why they couldn't beat Ole Miss at home. So I got Oklahoma clinging on to there. We kind of covered all five of the bottom five in my poll, but I'm telling you, Iowa's playing really good football right now. If it weren't for that loss to Iowa State out of conference, I'd probably have Iowa in the top 20 as a one-loss team if they would have been able to pull that one off. Now we move to 20. Texas. I'm very high on Texas right now. I think that they have an incredible ceiling, something to build off of that fourth quarter and overtime. We'll see about the status with Arch Manning. They're at 20 because I'm still in wait and see mode. I don't value them nearly as much. And also the Florida loss was a really bad loss. I knew Florida would clip somebody, and I knew going into the week that it felt like it was going to be Texas. There you go. With Texas at number 20, I think they're just going to get better from here, though. Missouri slides to 19. I've been very impressed with them, but I'm worried because of the situation at quarterback. You lost Sam Horn for the season, and now you lost Bo Pribula. You're going to have to play with a true freshman, but the thing is he did not look that bad at all against Vanderbilt. Almost led the game-tying drive, had a game-tying drive earlier. I think this Missouri team still has a lot of talent and a lot of ability, and their schedule is relatively favorable down the stretch. I think this Missouri team really needs to show us something, though, with this new quarterback. Then you got Louisville. Louisville's an interesting case to me. The loss to Virginia, that is going to be one that stings. They did not play their best game, in my opinion, against Virginia. But they were able to pull out some other gutsy wins as well along the way. And again, this is another team that when you look at their stretch down the season, I think that 11-1 is very, very possible for this Louisville team. And we want to talk about these scenarios. Virginia having the head-to-head with Louisville, meaning that Louisville would have to see Virginia lose twice while winning out. At number 16, I have Virginia. They have not looked good in recent weeks at all. They have not. specifically on the offensive side of the ball. Washington State, very fortunate to get out of that game with a win, and very fortunate to escape Chapel Hill with a win. Now, North Carolina's been playing better football, especially on defense, back-to-back weeks now. This Virginia team is starting to look like they have a little bit of cracks in the foundation. They do not look like a team to me that's going to be able to rally off 4 more straight wins against a relatively tough schedule. I mean, they get their second bye week before their next 3 games. Their next 3 games are not easy. They have to play Wake Forest and Duke back-to-back. You see what Wake Forest did to SMU on defense. They also have ability and skill position players on offense, and they're well coached with Jake Dicker. So, looking at Virginia going ahead, I expect to see 2 losses in the Final Four. That's just me. That's me kind of projecting ahead, but for this moment, you have to say Virginia is a better football team than Louisville. I slotted in Houston at number 17. Man, do they look good. Really complimentary football. Good on defense. Efficient with Connor Wegman moving the football and finishing drives. Tanner Koziel is one of the best tight ends nobody knows about in the country. I really like this Houston team. They just keep finding ways to win football games, and that is the most important part. I'm curious to see how they're going to do in this final home stretch going into November. How about Tennessee at 15? Their defense really still concerns me. They've been plagued with injuries all year, and I get that, but the drop-off of this defense with Tim Banks is something that's stunning to me. I was kind of banking on Tennessee having a better defense and their offense taking a step back, and that just has not happened. But the good news for Tennessee is the offense. I think most people did not expect them to be this good, and I certainly was very low on this Tennessee defense. They survived Kentucky, or not even survived, they just run away from Kentucky with that explosive offense. And, I got to give Josh Heupel a lot of credit for being able to rebuild that offense the way he has. I still don't think Joey Aguilar is very good. I think that he will limit them into a possible college football playoff appearance. But this Tennessee offense is still clicking, and you got to give him props for that. At number 14, I moved the Bearcats up. This Cincinnati team just keeps taking care of business, and the way that they were able to actually play really good defense, especially in the first half against Sawyer Robertson and that Baylor offense, it was very impressive. Baylor's not a very good team, but Cincinnati keeps taking care of business. They've done it on the road. They've been able to find a way to win when things went against them against Kansas. I think that this Cincinnati team is very dangerous down the stretch as well in the Big 12. However, I do not know if their ceiling is making the college football playoff. You got Notre Dame here at 13. Just keep doing your thing over there. Take care of business. I think your toughest games down the stretch, Navy and Pitt looming for the Fighting Irish. Texas Tech at number 12. This is a very good team, but the quarterback injuries continue to pile up for them. I am very concerned about what is to come from the quarterback room, but they can run the ball really well. And their defensive line showed to me, even in a loss against Arizona State, that they have depth at that position all across the defensive line. I mean, losing a guy like Skylar Gill-Howard is a huge deal, but they did not really miss a beat, I don't think. This Texas Tech team, they got to keep winning. They're not getting respect nationally that they probably should after that Arizona State loss. Everybody's kind of afforded one of those games. I saw that game coming before, especially with the revenge factor for the Sun Devils in that game. Texas Tech needs to keep on moving on. They got Kansas State coming up, by the way, in I think a week or two. That game is going to be huge because Kansas State is playing much better football right now. Vanderbilt, I have slotted in there at 11. I did not move him down. You can see I got a lot more respect for BYU. Huge win. Again, I don't trust them to do it down the stretch. Miami at number 10. They did not look good yesterday. Back-to-back weeks where they just did not look good. They got to find themselves offensively yet again. I just think this Miami team, something feels off about them these last 2 games. And again, I called the Louisville upset. I expected that, but I also expected for them to respond in a big way against Stanford, and they just did not do that. They technically covered. It was a late cover, a backdoor cover, if you will. I don't think Miami is playing good football right now. Number 9, Ole Miss. Still not sure about this team. I'm really not sure. But the problem is their schedule down the stretch. At worst they go 3-1, and if they're 10-2 within the SEC with some of the wins that they already notched, a road win at Oklahoma, for example, one of their losses to Georgia, I think this Ole Miss team is going to be in the college football playoff for sure, just because of the makeup of their schedule. Here's an interesting team to watch out for. Oregon has not played great football since that Indiana loss, and now you're looking at Oregon over here. I have them ranked number 8. The AP poll has them ranked higher because of the disrespect to Georgia Tech and BYU. I think this Oregon team has a lot of challenges still to come. They have to go to Iowa, they have to play USC, and they have to go to Washington, I believe. So Washington looked good yesterday. USC, I already talked about them, and Iowa, I already touched on them. They're playing really, really good football right now. These are not easy games for Oregon. They have a much tougher schedule in the Big Ten than they did a year ago. Georgia at number 7, that offense keeps clicking. I'm worried about that defense a little bit. I'm also worried about Mike Bobo down the stretch of the season in big moments. I have their arch rival Georgia Tech ranked one spot ahead of them. They're consistent. I know they should have lost to Wake Forest, and I get those comments there, but the problem is look at how many of these teams were in that position and didn't find ways to win. You could take a look at Texas Tech. You could take a look at Miami. You could take a look at Texas, who we already talked about against Florida. They found a way to win, and number 5, Alabama, they're in the same boat. Though they have that bad loss on their resume to Florida State, and it is a bad loss, I think that finding a way to win against South Carolina, that was big time because everything seemed to have gone against them in that second half, and yet they still were able to get it done. Number 4, BYU, similar to Georgia Tech, just in a more controlling fashion, in a more impressive fashion. BYU continues to find ways to win games. They have looked very impressive down the stretch. I thought in the second half they really turned it on against Iowa State. And I think this BYU team is getting completely slept on. Being tied at 10th in the AP poll with Miami is absurd. They should be ranked way higher, and it's just simply because these voters do not watch this BYU team. Number 3, Texas A&M. Look, they're starting to build a good resume. The win against Notre Dame keeps aging a little bit better, and I think this Texas A&M team is a really, really good football team. What is their ceiling at the end of the day, though? I think this Texas A&M team, their defense it's like disruptive but not good. You know what I mean? And we've seen defenses like that where they're going to be statistically kind of fluttering around that 30 to 40 spot in a lot of categories, but they're going to be disruptive. And I think the emergence of that defensive line as the season's gone on has helped elevate this team a little bit. Still waiting to see a little bit with Texas A&M, and I know that sounds crazy with them being 8-0 right now, and I just don't buy them at the moment as a real national championship contender. I buy Indiana much more, and the reason why I buy Indiana much more is because they play really complimentary football. You saw the pick 6 from Aiden Fisher. You see the elite play from the defensive line. You see how their secondary can play with the headliner being D'Angelo Pons. And then this offense is just really, really good. They have a great wide receiver core. I think Indiana's playing great football, and they have since the start of the year, and they have a real case to be number 1 at this moment just because they've been able to notch a little bit more of an impressive resume and be a little bit more impressive from an eye test perspective than Ohio State. But I know, as an Ohio State fan, Ohio State's not looking for eye test right now. They are just looking to grind away, get wins, and that's what I expect Ohio State to continue to do up until that Michigan game. And then when the Michigan game happens, that's going to be very important for Ohio State to open it up against Michigan because you don't want to lose to them. I don't care if you're 11-0 locked into the playoff. You do not want the noise that's going to come from Columbus when you get back home if you lose to the Michigan Wolverines. And at the end of the day, we got to see the glimpses that we've seen of Ohio State being able to open it up like we saw against Minnesota and Wisconsin through the air. They got to do that against Michigan because Michigan does look very vulnerable in the secondary. And they also got to confuse the crap out of Bryce Underwood. Current playoff picture. I was writing this stuff down It's right here somewhere. It might be in my other notebook. I hope it's in this one. Okay, it's right here. I was writing some of this down, and when I was thinking about a lot of this stuff, I was looking at the playoff picture like this. The group of 5 is going to decide itself. I think we'll have somebody emerge. If the American just beats each other up, that's going to be James Madison. We'll see what Navy can do down the stretch. You can obviously assume they're going to lose to Notre Dame, but if they keep it respectable against Notre Dame and win the rest of their games and win the American, I do believe we're going to see Navy in the college football playoff. Until then, I think James Madison's a good placeholder. I don't trust Memphis, and their loss against UAB is much worse than the loss that James Madison suffered at the hands of Louisville. So I just don't understand why Memphis, just because they beat USF, is now being vaulted above James Madison. I love the Dukes right now. When you talk about locks for the college football playoff, when I'm just looking, obviously they haven't claimed anything yet, but when I'm just looking at what's to come for these teams, I firmly expect to see Alabama and Ole Miss in the college football playoff. Firmly expect that. And I'm also going to tell you this. I think Indiana and Ohio State are locked in to the college football playoff. The other team that when I look at down the stretch, what do they have? I think Georgia Tech's in. I think they're in. I took a little screenshot of it, and I'm going to pull it up right here of these different ACC schedules. But in particular, when I looked at Georgia Tech at NC State, they have looked rough in recent weeks. It would be a big upset. I just don't see it happening. Boston College looks relatively lifeless, and then they have Pitt. And that'll be the biggest challenge, but the problem with that Pitt game is it's sandwiched right in between Pitt playing Notre Dame and Pitt playing Miami. I think that Georgia Tech game is going to be a little bit too much for Pitt. So I personally am expecting Georgia Tech to be 11-0 going into that Georgia game. And that's where things for Georgia really take a turn. You already heard me talk about Texas, and they cannot overlook Florida this upcoming weekend. Florida is capable of beating them. Their offense has been clicking. Georgia's has. They're going to be playing against a good Florida defense, and I think Florida could potentially be rejuvenated on the offensive side of the ball now that Billy Napier is no longer calling plays. You hear people talk about this a little bit. I talk about it a good bit. I kind of over-factored into it with some of my moneyline picks this week. I think that some teams just get a bump from a coach being fired, and I think doing it right before the bye week to have 2 weeks to prepare for Georgia, it's pretty big time. So I honestly kind of feel like Georgia is going to lose one more game before Georgia Tech, and that could be an elimination game for Georgia. So I didn't want to lock in Georgia into the playoff. Texas A&M probably should be in. They're 8-0 right now, and I do not expect them to be 9-3 at the end of the year. However, I'm not putting anything past Texas A&M. Another team I expect to be in this field. I expect to see Michigan in the field for the college football playoff. I think that this Michigan Wolverines team is better than everybody that they're going to play until Ohio State. And I think it's pretty simple. You beat Ohio State, you're potentially in the Big Ten championship, but you're certainly in the college football playoff. You lose, all of that's gone. I think that game's going to decide everything for the Wolverines, and it's going to be almost no pressure on Ohio State except for the pressure of having to wear a 4-year losing streak to the Wolverines. Oregon should be in. I talked about those 3 big games that I highlighted for Oregon. They just got to win 2 of the 3 to make the college football playoff, but only winning 2 of the 3 will be the difference for Oregon between potentially hosting a playoff game and having to travel for a playoff game. So I do not expect Oregon to be able to vault, no matter what they do the rest of the season, up to one of the byes. That's just how I see things. Texas Tech, they got a pretty tough road ahead, and so does BYU. I expect for one of those, if not both of those, to be in the college football playoff at the end of the year. And then I'm highlighting Louisville because I talked about them already. Even if they don't make the ACC championship, I think they're going to be sitting there at 11-1. and that's going to be a huge notch in their belt. And then what's going to happen with Miami? They got a tough back-to-back road trip to finish the year with Virginia Tech and Pitt. I think that if they lose one of those two, I'm especially circling Pitt for that. I think Miami might be done, and you're looking at the same situation as last year. Thank you guys for tuning in and sticking it out for the whole half hour. I'll see you guys in the next video where we're going to try to talk a little bit more college football tomorrow. Make sure you guys subscribe so you can get more video notifications. And I'll see you guys next time you tune in.